This is Irreversible Damage, Chapter 5. This one's subtitled The Moms and Dads. And this one's focusing on how the parents play a role. And before I get into it, I wanted to address a couple comments that I've received that are saying, like, just because Abigail is calling these people or these kids daughters and she and her doesn't mean that you should. And then they also say that it's very disrespectful that what I'm like going along with what Abigail's written here. Like at first I was like, okay, maybe you're right. I don't know. And then I really thought about it, and as I was reading this chapter, it was like it feels wrong to do it. The more I think about it, the less I see respect or disrespect out of it. I don't see how it's disrespectful when a kid doesn't really know what they're doing, which I'll address that a little bit more further in this video, actually. I see it more like I'm having to use the opposite pronouns just to assuage trans activists and older trans people. That's what it feels like. So I'm kind of not on that boat. Anyway, so let's get into this. Yeah, so this one's about the moms' dads. It's mostly the moms, but it does cover a little bit of the dads, just a little bit. So we're like first introduced in this chapter a woman named Catherine. Catherine is different from all the other mothers that have been mentioned previously in this book, in that she was like, unlike the other mothers who were like, ooh, well, that's a little weird. Like, I don't think you are a boy. Blah 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 blah. Doubt doubt doubt. Catherine was just like, oh well, that's fine. Sure, I'll call you by what you want. Yeah, why not? I accept trans people and their rights. She didn't see any problem at first. She totally went with it. She totally supported her daughter. I think it's really important to note that Catherine's also a Democrat, a liberal, and a progressive who has supported the rights of gay people and gay people to marry. And, like, yeah, again, she didn't see anything wrong with, like, other trans people. She totally accepted them. But despite holding so much support for the LGBTQ community, the further that she investigated this whole thing, the more she started seeing holes, and the stress of it all just started creeping up. First of all, of her understanding of the trans identity, uh, her daughter had no gender dysphoria at all, child onset gender dysphoria. It just kind of sprouted up coincidentally after her daughter's school had an assembly where, like, this teenage trans person was, doing like a presentation of gender stuff, and then her daughter just like picked up on it, like snatched it right away, going, "Ooh, that sounds like me," as if it's a job. Ooh, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up, that kind of like, ooh. It's also important to note that her daughter was later, I don't know when later was, but in the book, it just said later diagnosed, but she was later diagnosed with high functioning autism, and there are so many other cases of other young trans girls having high functioning autism as well. So that's like, huh, kind of feels again coincidental. Like, and her diagnosis goes completely unaddressed with all the therapists Catherine sends her kid to. And it's just like, why? Don't you think that's kind of interesting? Kind of maybe a little bit suspicious? I don't know. Like, that's something to address instead of saying, oh, well, it's just part of it. When Catherine took her daughter to several different therapists, every single one of them claimed, quote, at this age, her daughter was 12 years old, Kids know who they are. And I got such a bone to pick with that. How can you possibly say kids know who they are when, like, first and foremost, adults don't even know who they are? You know, like, I didn't really understand who I was really until, this year. Like, I feel like I understand myself way better than when I was like 20 or even 19. I barely knew myself. And not because I'm a special case and I have some kind of weird personality disorder or mental illness. It's because that's just what happens to adults. They don't know. And so many people, even older than me, they don't know themselves quite well because they don't get to deep dive and get away from other people. But the things that we like and dislike are all from our environment. And the kids, especially, are like, oh, well, Susie said this, so I'm that. As opposed to, I'm just gonna look like this is just how I've come to conclude this, whatever this is. We are always influenced by other people. So I think it's really doing a disservice to kids saying like, oh, they know themselves. Like, in some very innate ways, with like preferences and proclivities and stuff, like, yeah, okay, that's solidified, but there's so many other factors to our personalities that are not innate and they are influenced by other people. So no, 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 no. I can't believe a therapist would say that. Not even just one, but many. And as Catherine was looking into like all this stuff, she struggled to find anybody who said anything like even remotely against transitioning. All it was is pro transitioning, you have to do it kind of thing. There was no inkling of, maybe let's like stop and think. It's all action, action, action. We have to do it. We have to go. Time depends on it. It doesn't help that tons of major psychological health wiki type and Wikipedia type pages, websites all urge toward one line of thinking, which is transitioning. There is no, maybe she'll just grow out of it. Let's just wait. Catherine did pretty much not identically, but she did really similar things that my mom did. And she, like, she really tried to support her daughter, which is what my mom did. Like, even while she was like, I don't know, this seems a little weird, but I want to see you happy. I want to see you succeed and stuff. And if this helps you, okay, maybe. I don't feel right doing it, but I'm gonna do it, and that's what Catherine did as well. She goes to a great number of gender therapists and gender clinics and all this stuff, and uh, one of them, and I quote, claimed that there seems to be no good reason to not affirm, the kids' newfound gender identity. And I didn't like how they say seems. Seems suggests that there are some reasons, but you just didn't bother looking into them. And there seems to be no good reason, only because uh, any information that goes against transitioning for kids is banned and removed, silenced, censored. And I mean, I've seen it myself on some of the trans subreddits where someone will post something that's like, hey man, you don't need to transition. You can do alternatives, you can do these things, and they'll just be completely silenced and banned. It's just like, why can't people say something like, you don't have to, man? It's like, why not you do these alternatives first? Why does it always have to be one way? Why does it have to be one line of thinking? We can say that, especially with like Catherine's daughter's school, uh, where she brings in her evidence and the school just completely ignores her. So it's just like, okay, well, if I can't do that, geez. Uh, One of the things about like rushing into all this, Like, we have no choice. We have to do it. We have to transition these kids uh, into the opposite sex. We have to do it because suicide is just like, it just seems like this looming threat. If you don't help your kid transition, then they're gonna die. That's like just the undercurrent of this entire thing. They'll die if you don't do it, which is, I feel like I've said this so many times, but it's so threatening, and it works. Your child will die if you don't do this. Your child will start doing self-harm if you don't do this. Only you have to do this one thing, otherwise it won't work. One of the gender therapist people was like, warned that her daughter would end up using duct tape if Catherine didn't buy her a binder. Like, Catherine abandons she abandons the other gender therapist, hoping a different one will be better, and then she winds up with this gender clinic specializing in like autistic trans kids, and that's when puberty blockers are brought up. This is what like really rattled her and made her go, okay, whoa, we need to pump the brakes with this. This is going too fast. This feels wrong. What? Why don't we think carefully about this for a moment? What the gender clinicians tell Catherine, and what I've read online and what I've heard online and from young trans people as well. Well, they give off this very thick impression that it's very innocent, it's very simple, it's a quick and easy fix. For those who are unsure if they're trans, it buys time so that the kid may have a more mature and informed decision on being trans. The problem with this, well, there's many problems with this, but first of all, you can't treat a drug that's being used off-label, which means the FDA approved of it in one way, but then you started using it in another. That you can't do that, and nobody seems to be really talking about it. It says in the book that it was originally for prostate cancer treatment in kids with precocious puberty. I feel like the book kind of did it a little bit of a disservice on what like puberty blockers really are. So I did my own research, and it's also used to treat women with PCOS and endometriosis. None of them should be used for more than 6 months. Like, 2 months is like, okay, 2 months is like reasonable. 6 months is like, that's the limit that you should be on these. But when it comes to transgender people, transgender kids, quote unquote, they're on it for years. Like 1 year is like, whoa, that's a lot. But like a few, and when I think few, I think of like 4 years maybe. I don't think it really matters. If it's 1 or even 2, that's too long on this drug. And upon further reading, there have been 24,000 reports of adverse reactions to this drug, which is Lupron specifically. Reactions to this drug include osteoporosis, memory loss, severe joint pain to the point of being wheelchair bound. Lupron arrests bone growth, decreases bone accretion, prevents the sex steroid-dependent organization and maturation of the adolescent brain, and inhibits fertility by preventing the development of gonadal tissue and mature, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, gametes. Upon further research, some of the side effects, the lovely side effects, include problems with your pituitary gland, which goes into sudden severe headaches, vomiting, problems with your eyes or vision, changes in mood or behavior, bone pain, loss of movement in any part of your body, swelling, rapid weight gain, seizures, unusual changes in mood or behavior, crying spells, anger, feeling irritable, sudden chest pain or discomfort, wheezing, dry cough or hack, painful or difficult urination, or high blood sugar. So increased thirst, increased urination, hunger, dry mouth, fruity breath odor. Rare but serious side effects include pain or unusual sensation in your back, numbness, weakness, or tingly feelings in your legs or feet, muscle weakness or loss of use, loss of bowel or bladder control, heart attack symptoms such as chest pain or pressure, pain spreading to your jaw or shoulder, nausea, sweating, or signs of a stroke, which would be sudden numbness or weakness, especially on one side of the body, sudden severe headache, and slurred speech. And like already it's just like, oh, that's really scary. The claims of Lupron being like totally safe and all the other ones being totally safe are exclusively from the FDA approval of, the original use of these things, like, PCOS, endometriosis, and it's for middle-aged or older men with prostate cancer, not for pubescent or prepubescent children. And like I said before, like the gender clinicians, not just toward Catherine, but like in general, in other trans influencers will say that puberty blockers are perfectly fine, they're perfectly safe, it's well studied. No, it's not. uh, I've seen others claim that the effects are entirely reversible if the patient so chooses to get off the blockers, that puberty will start as normal when off of them, and this this is false, because once you have uh, loss in bone density and loss in brain development, like there's no getting that back. I've read some other cases where it's like when they were on puberty blockers as a kid and then they grow up later, they're like wheelchair bound and constant pain. One of them said that I have a body of an 80-year-old when I'm only like 22. It seems like malpractice. And then, like, it says in the book, almost 100% will go to do cross-sex hormones anyway. The reason why the kid is just going to go on cross-sex hormones anyway is because one of them's my idea. The other two are Abigail's. Mine is the kids are never offered an alternative idea of gender during the period in which they are undergoing puberty blockers, or even before. And then hers are the kids are reasonably certain they want to lead a transgender life anyway, and so my thing is, like, my insert is, then what's the point of puberty blockers if you're reasonably certain? Like, just get on cross-sex hormones for God's sake. Not that I'm advocating for it, but it's just like, well, what's the point? What's the point of jeopardizing your life like that? Then there's the case of just being stubborn and proud. You've made it this far, with socially transitioning. Why not just go all the way? And with all this information on Lupron and other puberty blocker stuff, like I said, with like she goes to the schools and they ignore her, but also like she goes to transgender forums to warn other parents about the adverse effects of Lupron, like I listed. And again, like unsurprisingly, all of her posts were deleted, and she wound up banned from all of them. The more that she looked into it and like gave up on these people, she eventually found two websites that aren't anti-trans, they're just anti-child transitioning, which nobody seems to want to differentiate between the two, but the difference is that anti-trans would be like all across the board. I don't want anybody transitioning. That would be anti-trans. But anti-child transitioning is, I don't care if they're an adult and they're doing this, especially if they're not my kid, but if they're a kid transitioning, like, no, that shouldn't happen. The websites are Fourth Wave Now, which is the US version, and Transgender Trend, which is the UK version. Catherine, herself founded the Kelsey Coalition, which I looked into it a little bit. Not necessarily her website, but I looked into the whole, like, what exactly is the Kelsey thing? Who's this? Who's Kelsey? And when looking at the title and the intent of this, the whole thing, like, I found Dr. Francis Oldham, old, Oldham, Oldham Kelsey, who back in 1960 had warned the world of the dangers of, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, that thalidomide, which I looked that up. Thalidomide was uh, advertised as something that would stop morning sickness for pregnant women, and then lo and behold, the babies come up deformed. And yeah, so they're like, yeah, whatever, nah, we're gonna keep going. I believe it was originally made in Germany, and then it started being circulated in Canada, and this woman, Frances, comes along, and she's like, hey, we need to stop. And then people are like, oh, you know what, maybe you're right. Maybe we should stop. I don't know. Apparently it was in circulation in Canada for just like 3 months, but even 3 months is like a long time. So many kids can be born during that time. So much can happen in 3 months. So the manufacturers, or the people who developed thalidomide, the German company, they completely ignored complaints of these moderate to severe and sometimes even permanent nerve damage caused by the drug. They equally dismissed the deformed babies that came out of it. So I can see the very clear parallels between thalidomide and Lupron and other puberty blockers, because there's this same thing of, we're gonna ignore you, we're gonna ignore complaints, we're just gonna keep it in circulation, we don't really care who gets hurt, we're just gonna keep doing it, most likely because, hey, money. And then it just made me think, like, huh, so you don't care about children, you people seem to care more about, like, money and the protecting the idea of trans identification. So children are, from what I can see, they are collateral damage as well as pawns to keep it going. Another theme I noticed in while reading this chapter, while reading more about the parents, especially the dads that were listed in here. One of them was like Richard. I've noticed that the moms and dads tend to be lawyers or just something, a nice, well-paying job that requires a lot of time and energy spent at the job and barely at home. And I wanted to say this before, but it didn't really fit in with what I was talking about. But I was just thinking that a lawyer or something along those lines, I don't see emotional and physical availability, and I don't see psychological understanding of their child. They just kind of have this child, and they're like, I like you, I love you as a kid, but, like, I don't know anything about what's going on in here. But and this made me think about my own parents, who were, they didn't, like, have super high end jobs or anything, but they had jobs where uh, a lot of time was spent at work, and they would just kind of come home mentally exhausted, and not just their jobs, but they were both people who couldn't really express emotion that well, and I like to call it emotionally constipated. And I would say while we were kids that, like, as much as uh, our mom wanted to help us and stuff, like, she still just couldn't really connect because she couldn't, tap into those emotions. She couldn't tap into her own, so therefore she couldn't tap into ours. Because of that, there was like this kind of drift in a way, like that just didn't really feel as connected as we could have otherwise been. I can only really speak for myself that I felt emotionally isolated, and I just feel like if these girls had a soapbox to stand on, like, I feel like they would relate to that when a parent is unavailable in any way. Um, they the kid longs for that sort of connection, so they go to something else that will possibly fill in that connection. They want that emotional stuff. They want somebody to really understand them, and so the trans ideology comes in and says, "Oh, we'll love you," and then the kid just latches onto it real quick because they want what they're missing at home. While I was reading the chapter and the chapters before, it was like, yes, the moms are so like physically present and they'll like listen to their daughters about all their phases and all this stuff. Even if allegedly the moms are like totally there and very supportive and all that, it's like if the father is not present, whether physically or emotionally, there's a void in the daughter. I have another link down below going into like what like the effect of an absent father has on a daughter, and I would highly recommend that. Can't explain it here. Fathers in this book would in this chapter they they would just fanatically provide money, and it's also in previous chapters as well. They provide money, but they just, and even Abigail noticed it herself, but she didn't say anything directly. But she knew there was no emotional openness and availability, and it was all just like, oh well, my daughter's. We got her an apartment, we got her this, and we got all her material things, but the fathers would never once say, and Richard in this case would never say, like, she broke my heart, I loved her, It was always just like, well, I've done so much for her, and it's like, it, that just kind of scares me a little bit. Like, yeah, okay, you provided the material, but where's the emotional? Your kid needs that. So, moving on again, Abigail points out the Gen X moms would believed, like, I don't know about anymore, but they believed in therapy and psychology, and that it was really, critically important to understand the inner workings of your mind, be Jungian, be Freudian, all that stuff, get to know yourself, that sort of thing. But that seems to be kind of a bit of a problem with the next generation that followed. So these Gen X moms will, my mom as well, they would take their like 2 or 3 year old into therapy thinking like, oh, maybe we can solve something, which just brings around this like training of, I gotta be aware of diagnostic criteria, I gotta be aware of mental illnesses. So then that brings the kid to grow up and really trust and be very aware of the diagnostic criteria of XYZ, whatever they're going through, uh, which means, self diagnosis and diagnosing everybody else around them. Um, and a kid should not have that kind of, not responsibility, but that kind of power, I guess, because they're not qualified to diagnose themselves. And, I mean, some of these therapists aren't qualified either, but whatever. A kid, especially. Abigail goes to point out that because there seems to be like a little bit like too much enthusiasm for psychotherapy and all that stuff, like too much. information on mental illness for very young children who aren't prepared for this information. Human emotion gets misconstrued with mental illness because of all this awareness and stuff. And I can relate to this quite a bit because I was one of those kids, like I said in some other video, I was saying, like, when I was a kid and teen, I was kind of a hypochondriac a little bit. And, like, when it came to mental illnesses, I would just be like, I was petrified for a really long time that I might be also like one of these high functioning autistic girls, and that just like that scared me. I also thought, like, oh, what if I have this personality disorder? What if I have this one? What if I have this comorbidity with this one? Ah! And it would just be needless, anxiety over, like, oh God, what am I? And it's just like, you don't know. Like, go to therapy and find out why you self-diagnosing constantly. Like, the older I've become, I'm 25 now, but the older I've become, the more I realize, like, how pretty much how normal my mental health is with this. I gotta diagnose you and I gotta diagnose me. Like, not that goes beyond just mental illnesses. It goes into, like, I've evaluated myself and I think I'm homosexual, or I'm this gender, or whatever. Like, that same sort of idea of I gotta be aware of these things and then I gotta apply it to myself. There really is no need to rush into, like, oh, I have depression, oh, I have generalized anxiety disorder, oh, I'm homosexual. Like, I need to know. Like, you don't really need to know when you're a kid. You don't need a label, is what I'm trying to get at. Like, yeah, you might have anxiety, you might be fearful of new things, you might be attracted to someone of the same sex, but it's like, so why do you need to label it? So there's almost no point in labeling it. Because when it comes to mental illnesses, it's like we aren't our mental illnesses. Someone isn't bipolar. They have bipolar disorder. And saying that they are it suggests that it's entirely encompassing and they can't get out of it, and there's no way to, not cure, but there's like no way to maintain it and manage it. It just feels like this is it. You can't do anything. You have it. You're trapped, which is entirely false. You can manage it. There is hope. So, just going with this label, I mean, especially when it comes to young people, they'll just over-identify with this label. Oh, I'm bipolar. I have all these things, and then they kind of like, they don't, like, their ego latches onto it, and then they're like, I can't get out of this. This is just who I am. This is what I've got to do. And so I've also seen it where, oh, well, I have this personality disorder, so therefore you have to treat me like this. And it's like, you can't do that. When it comes to the homosexuality thing, she brings up how many young girls, including herself and the moms that she was talking to, would develop crushes on their girl friends, their girl space friends, because when they would have crushes on boys, they would just be like disenfranchised from it and just be like, ugh. He doesn't care about me on these things. He's not doing XYZ for me. He doesn't want to commit to me. Blah, blah, blah. And so, because of this, like, this heartbreak from the boys, who are just a little too immature to just really, like, understand it, because they're going through this phase of, oh, I want to put my ween in that thing, That's what they're mostly doing. And, yeah, so the girls will go to their girlfriends being like, oh, well, you supported me when I was going through this. And, they project the feelings that they had for these boys to their lady friends. And that can be very easily mistaken as homosexuality or bisexuality. but then eventually they grow up and they're like, I mostly prefer the opposite sex. That's usually what happens. Not all the time, but it's usually. The same sort of thing can be applied to gender dysphoria. There's a criteria for it, and people will list how it feels to be trans and blah, blah, blah. And with all this mental health, mental illness, sleuthing, and all this stuff, and there's like this underpinning theme of I need solutions, I need pills, because if I'm not constantly calm and serene and confident or whatever, then I'm mentally ill and I'm going crazy. This isn't right. I shouldn't be feeling this. They'll look at the trans thing and transitioning, and they'll say like, that will give me my serenity. That'll give me my calm. That'll give me my happiness. My conclusion to this chapter, I know it was a little like kind of everywhere. After I read this, like, and the other chapters as well, I'm noticing that it's like no matter how you look at it, no matter how you slice it, the trans ideology just obliterates families. In the book, it said it's a wrecking ball for families. And like it doesn't matter if the trans kid feels like their parents are abusing them and therefore they run away, or it's the parents driving them out because they're so concerned and they're so concerned over their kid, reasonably and understandably. Too much concern and a clear misunderstanding of the child's needs may just lead a kid into believing in something that really doesn't apply to them. Also, as I was saying, with like the upper middle class things, their lives are relatively like pretty easy. Trust fund kids, if you know what I mean. And they kind of go out along with life without major challenges. Their challenges are like pretty much solved for them because the parents want to see them uh, untouched by the nasty part of life. I feel like we've all kind of seen it where there's like this mounting pressure to keep kids safe because we never want to have this kid, our kid, to experience what we've experienced as kids. And, the consequence of doing that is that they won't really be like you. They won't be as mature as you. They won't be as experienced as you, and therefore a little bit unrelatable. And so there's like a little bit of distance because you didn't allow them to experience life and challenges and stuff. And Abigail mentioned this too. There's like this need to rebel, and having parents be like so accepting and protective and all that stuff, and softening the edges of everything. There's like no room to rebel and get away from it and just be independent. So these kids will look into the trans identity and be like, oh, well, there it is. That's my answer. That's how I can get away from, this is my chance for independence kind of thing. So, yeah, that's it. Yeah, so, yeah, there's going to be a bunch of links down below elaborating on many of the points that I've made. So I hope some people check those out. And I will see you sometime next week. Yeah, maybe. Oh, bye.